This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Well, here we are back in a conversation about conservatives and climate change. Coming up in about 15, 20 minutes from now, we're going to check in with Ben Dachis and Adam Sweet. They've worked for conservative premiers, or at least conservative parties, in the provinces of Ontario and Alberta, respectively. They've got a new piece out in the Hub. I'm not sure if you've checked it out yet or not, but they say it's time for conservatives to lead on climate policy, and here's why. And they lay out their arguments. I want to dig into that. You might be going, well, yeah, I mean, people know that forever. Some of you might be saying, well, hang on a second. Some conservatives had led on some climate policy. I'm looking forward to getting into this. We'll probably talk about Ed Stelmach. We'll talk about Jason Kenney. We'll talk about Doug Ford. And, of course, we'll talk about Danielle Smith as well. What does Pierre Poilievre's plan look like? How fulsome will it be? It's got to be more than just axe the tax, right? We'll get into it with these two. Plus, we're going to dig into our mailbag. We've got some impassioned responses, Johnny, impassioned emails from educators that heard us talking a week ago today. That was September 26th. The Jason Schilling, the president of the Alberta Teachers Association, the head of the teachers union, basically in the province of Alberta, talking about Alberta's education system in crisis, despite an announcement, more than $8.5 billion toward new schools, that announced by Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith. Schilling says it's not doing enough to address the issues, and we've got some firsthand perspectives here from Corrine and Laura that we're going to get into as well. Plus, we were talking to cowboys and cowgirls yesterday. We were getting set for Canadian Finals Rodeo, so we didn't spend much time. We didn't spend any time at all, as a matter of fact, digging into that vice presidential debate. But I know there was at least one moment that we wanted to get into, and I think that real talkers might be interested to hear it as well. One of my, a follow of mine on Twitter, a guy that I really enjoy his take, Tyler Austin Harper, writes for The Atlantic. He's got an interesting take on the importance of fact-checking, and that's something that pops up, I think, with talk shows all around the world, obviously, and political debates in particular. In this instance, you'll see why if you haven't yet heard the soundbite, but I wanted to get into that and get your take as well, Real Talkers. Before we go any further, I want to remind you that Business Career College is making this episode possible, and they're putting out the call specifically to certified financial planners. Those of you that are working as senior finance professionals, you know that cryptocurrency is set to change Canadians' investments in private wealth. About 3/4 of the new generation, when they're polled, they're telling pollsters that they're interested in adding digital assets to their financial portfolios. That means that financial advisors are seeing more questions about things like blockchain, Bitcoin, NFTs, decentralized finance. They're being asked about wealth preservation strategies to hedge against inflation and currency devaluation. But you want to be able to advise your clients effectively, right? You got to go beyond these self-teach videos or social media reels. You want to go with a professional structured designation course led by industry experts. Well, look no further than businesscareercollege.com. They've just launched the CDAA. That's the Certified Digital Asset Advisor designation. They've been a leader in financial training since 1997, so you know you're getting the goods here. You're getting the good stuff. You're going to be ready to serve your clients better than ever before, and you're going to knock 20% off the price of that investment in your career using the promo code Ryan20, all one word. That's Ryan20, 20% off the CDAA designation when you visit businesscareercollege.com. Vice presidential debate had everybody talking a short time ago, about 36 hours ago, and everybody was. It sort of seems to be this common consensus. Everybody was saying like J.D. Vance kind of was winning, or J.D. Vance won, or J.D. Vance was almost winning right up until the end. That was kind of the consensus. People thought that Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's running mate, sort of had his moments, picked his spots, represented himself well, but Vance came across as sort of palatable. I think did what he could to present himself as like the equal to Walz.
Normal.
Normal, right? Like that was kind of the assignment, right?
Yeah, but I was looking at some of the numbers here from the left and the right, and it looks like dead even. Like some of the numbers have, 1%, 2% Vance ahead. Some of them had Walz by the end ahead, 1%, 2%. But in the end, when we talk about this, and I know I don't want to, head this, say this ahead of this, but it's a vice presidential debate. Does it really matter? We want to see the real debates. We want to see Harris-Trump part 2, right? But it was pretty funny. There was some moments where things went a little awry. We'll play a clip in a minute, but.
Well, I mean, why don't we get right to it? Because this is kind of the one that's got everybody talking. So before we go any further, here it is from the vice presidential debate just a short time ago.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check.
Okay. So there you go. I already see Tony in our live chat going, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. But yeah, so,
come on, I didn't know you were going to call me on everything I said here in the debate. I thought we were just.
The rule was, the agreement was, we weren't going to fact check. You got to it's one of those things where you might sort of try to make the argument later. You go, well, this was taken out of context. That was taken out of context. Well, not really. That's kind of a weird thing to say. He's on the record saying it, and it's, of course, raised eyebrows all around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not happy he's getting fact-checked on the, on the stories that he wants to tell to win over the electorate.
Yeah. Two very different guys, though. You've got Waltz from Minnesota.
Yeah.
Minnesota.
Kind of the coach, likable coach.
And then you got Vance kind of, I don't know. How do you feel about Vance?
Well, I think that it's safe to say that most people had no idea who the hell he was before all of this. I know that he's had some disciples from the book and kind of like he's got a movement. Obviously, he caught Trump's attention enough. But I always feel
kind of
like
similar. He's from Ohio,
like he's he kind of reminds me of there's that sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like there's kind of this genre of thought leaders, and I might be using that phrase loosely, but these kind of like these relatively younger guys that have the book out there, sort of like got their certain way of thinking, and then they kind of have built a lot of support around them based on their thoughts on the establishment or what have you. Mm-hmm. And so I think that Vance comes into it with some momentum, but make no mistake, in so many ways it's also true with the Democrats. He's not the big name on the ticket, right? And I think that like you said, maybe there's less interest on what he brings to the table, what Waltz brings to the table. I don't think anybody thinks Waltz is like this super compelling candidate that they'd be thrilled to be running as president either. But I think that the running mate provides some insight into the presidential candidate and where their priorities are and where their thinking is at. So that's obviously why people are interested. But I thought that Tyler Harper, he writes for the Atlantic, and I've appreciated his perspective in past. You can find him at Tyler A. Harper on Twitter. And he makes an argument. This post is just out this morning. He says we need to separate the journalistic case for fact checking. Like news outlets have a duty to fact check, but you need to separate the journalistic case for it from the political case. He says we've spent a decade calling out Donald Trump's lies, and it's done very little to stop him. Myth-busting is good journalism, but it's not a political strategy. He says, so the VP debate should have been fact-checked. That was CBS's journalistic responsibility. But, the Democrats treat fact-checking like it's some magic bullet when it's often little more than magic beans. The obsession with proving Trump is a liar, which everyone knows, says Harper, is a political dead end. And the obsession with fact-checking is bad for Democrats. When the GOP and Republicans are spreading vile BS about immigrants eating pets, there it is again, says the Dems mostly contented themselves with pointing out that Trump and Vance were lying as opposed to telling the public why their own immigration policy is better, right? He says, and this fixation on debunking lies has become an excuse not to do politics, not to share a substantive vision with vision for the future. Democrats have relied on making the negative case that Trump is an evil liar, Harper says he is, rather than a positive case that they have better ideas. This is kind of reminding me of the most recent Alberta election. He says, I also think that we need to be more honest about why conservatives don't trust fact-checking. They don't trust fact-checking because the media tells the truth about Trump. He's a liar, and they don't want to hear it. But also because the media isn't always an honest broker either. He says the liberal media spent months telling everybody that Biden was fine, right? Tisk-tisking anyone who suggested otherwise, insisting that the many videos showing Biden's clear cognitive decline were something called cheap fakes. So is it a wonder that some are rolling their eyes at fact-checking? Real Talk wasn't pulling that BS. Real Talk was calling it how it was, weren't we? People didn't like it. They were calling it ageism, but it's a fact. He says we need both better journalism and better politics. I like his call to action here. He says, in part, that means separating fact-checking as a journalistic endeavor, one that's both necessary, deeply necessary, he says, and a professional responsibility, from fact-checking as a political project or one that's sometimes selectively applied. And he says if Harris wins this election, it'll be because the Democrats have better policies. And he says, and they do. And because they're convinced that the public, or they've convinced the public, rather, that they have a real vision for a better future. And they'll do that by focusing on what they believe to be true, not on their opponent's lies. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that. And I think that that's something that's applicable to politics all around the world. But in particular, it's on display in this election right now.
Oh, for sure.
Your whole strategy can't just be like, the other guy's lying.
Yeah.
Your strategy's got to be like, here's what the world will look like. Here, United States, or in our case, here's Canada or Alberta or Ontario, whatever, will look like under our leadership. Here's our vision, our plan.
I agree. Point it out. Say, if someone makes a point, say that's not the truth, and then go into your policy. Like, tell us more about what you are going to do for us. And I agree that in this, with the Trump-Harris debate, the Trump-Biden debate, the Vance-Walz debate, it's all about like trying to prove the other guy, the other person, the other candidate is a liar. Whereas in the grand scheme of thing here, though, Ryan, I don't think any of this matters. I think this election is going to be a dead heat. The numbers still show that. I think that whoever wins, the other side is going to say, at least from Trump's side, if Harris wins by a narrow margin, if Trump wins by a narrow margin, I think, either side is going to say there was, voter tampering, stuff like that. So I don't think any of these debates matter, although I love them. They're comedy, they're entertainment. But I don't think anyone's sitting at home and saying, wow, the moderator fact-checked Vance on that. I should switch my vote. It's so I agree. I think there is even the moderators now are taking this whole fact-checking banner as the initial thing that we should do in every debate. And it kind of like I said, where are the issues? Where is I want to hear more about Harris talking about her plan for immigration rather than saying the dogs and cats aren't being eaten kind of thing.
Although at that point you also sort of go, well, you can't ignore that kind of stuff.
You can't, but I don't think anyone.
What about an example here in Alberta? What about an example? I mean, it's been a story nationally and maybe even, I guess, internationally once Alberta's premier started mentioning like NORAD and the U.S. Department of Defense with the chemtrails question that Danielle Smith took at the town hall the other day. But, we've received some interesting emails. There's a couple coming up. By the way, it's an early edition of the Flamethrower coming up at the end of this episode, the wrap of this episode. We're going to get to a couple of folks' takes on the chemtrails story. But if you haven't heard, if you're like one of the 6 people that haven't heard already, Danielle Smith takes a question from a party supporter about chemtrails, and she basically says, like, she says, I've talked to the lady that controls the airspace, and, she's told me that you're not allowed to just go up there.
Who is this lady, first of all?
But, you're not allowed to go up there and just spray chemicals. And then she starts getting kind of booed by the crowd. So then she goes, but I have been told that if anybody is doing it, it's the U.S. Department of Defense. And so we've, like, I don't know how you want to describe it.
Is there a need to fact check that?
Well,
because right after, we get this from NORAD.
Yeah,
so.
well, and kudos to Luke and his team at Press Progress for they released a story obviously hours later, having reached out to the U.S. DoD and it's like
they said no, we're not trying to kill you, Canada.
It just seems so ridiculous. Like we've got an email here from somebody that just basically says, like, this is from Russ, and I'm going to get to this later. His Flamethrower, the subject line of the email, chemtrails. And then he says, I can't believe that's my subject line. Like, I'm sitting there going, I can't believe we're talking about chemtrails. It makes me, I'm laughing the whole time. Yeah. But then, we've had feedback from people that are saying, we've been criticized of making light of this, of taking it too lightly. And I know that some of you audience members here feel like that the Canadian media is not doing its job, being hard enough on fact checking around chemtrails. And like, part of me is just sitting there going, are we for real here? Like, are we going to be fact checking around Bigfoot and like getting all super serious? Or like at some point on some things, do you just go, this is absolutely ridiculous.
Let's not even address it.
It's obviously, I think, a political liability for Alberta's premier to be even going there. Yeah. But when you start talking about things like fact-checking that kind of stuff, to what end?
We're going to be here all day, Ryan, for every debate, every news press conference, because every politician, whether they're lying or twisting the truth or what Danielle Smith does with just her amazing presence and the way she communicates with the public. I mean, we're going to be fact-checking things all day. And Alberta girl in the chat, a great comment. Nope. Does anyone even value the truth anymore? Do they even care if an expert comes on from either side and devalues something, somebody in a debate says? I think they're already ingrained, especially now, the division here in Canada, especially in the States. I think they've already made their choice. I think this election is over. We could vote today, and there's not going to be much change between now and November.
Yeah, Justin says fact-checking is important. He says, I'm honestly baffled that we're talking about this when one side is not being held to account at all.
It's important, but
he says that's how misinformation is normalized.
It's just too much. Too much. We're getting too much of it now. It's diluting everything else, right?
Yeah. Somebody said in replying to one of our tweets this week, and I wish I could credit them, but off the top of my head, someone said something like, I had commented that Danielle Smith was walking a fine line with courting the support of these conspiracy theorists, where, number one, she can't laugh. She can't sort of like blow them off and come across like she's kind of mocking the chemtrails thing, but at the same time, she's got to like represent some sort of normalcy and appear to be like reasonable and competent and able to represent the brand that is Alberta, able to represent the 5 million people, the industries out of Alberta. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, talking about this fine line, like she's not walking a fine line, it's lunacy. I said, no, like, she's walking the fine line, trying to court and maintain this support, because it's kind of like an unruly bunch a little bit. You don't ever know what you're going to get. You don't ever know what questions you're going to get at a town hall. Yeah. I mean, chemtrails is probably one of the more normal questions that she could expect to get from some of these supporters. So she is in a tough spot. But the point is, somebody replied back and said, stop trying to, you heard the phrase greenwashing. Somebody said, stop trying to sane wash what she's talking about.
Sure.
Like, this stuff is not sane. This stuff is not reasonable or normal. And number one, I mean, quite frankly, it's been the number one political story out of the province of Alberta this week.
And she's got to be careful, because those people, they are her base, whether they're crazy, whether they're moderate, whether they're sensible people. It's like walking into a house, like an after party, and a bunch of bros are there and they all want to hear their song on the Spotify and they're hammered, and you're like, well, maybe we'll play a few of their songs and then throw in some other stuff, even though I don't like, whatever artist it is. I was going to say an artist, but then...
Well, you decided not to. You decided to...
Even though I don't like MGK.
Yeah.
Or whoever.
Erica says, is there actually, though, a significant portion of the population that's actually undecided? She says, I think the lines have been drawn and the camps are closing ranks.
Well, that's
totally
what I mean.
agree.
I'm
not convinced that there's
already...
undecideds virtually anywhere right now. I don't feel like it.
And
I was we were out at the rodeo last night and having a good and frank conversation with people of different political backgrounds. Can you believe I was able to be in a room and have a wonderful time and talk with people of different political backgrounds?
It happens. It exists.
But I asked the rude question, because I'm happy to ask rude questions. And I said, I want to know right now who everybody would vote for today. And there was nobody, and actually everybody gave straight answers. Everybody knew right away. And you're going to go, I mean, this is anecdotal, obviously. This isn't official polling. But like, not a single person hummed and hawed. No. Not a single person in the room said, I'm waiting to see what Poilievre's going to do, to replace the carbon tax, or I'm waiting to see what Trudeau does going to prorogue Parliament. Like, nobody. I don't
think there's any place here or in the States that would change much of. I think we could have both elections in both places, and but the needle's not going to move. I think everyone's pretty much set on who they're going to vote for right now, and it's pretty divided. And somebody said it on our show the other day. Nowadays, it's a lot about vibes. You're not even listening. You don't care about the fact checking. I don't even think you care much about the policy. I mean, I'm sure you do deep down. You're listening, but it's a vibe. It's a feeling you get from the person you're voting for. And I think with Trump supporters, they've had this feeling for years and years, and I don't think they're going to be swayed to go over to vote for Harris or anyone else. And I think it's the same here in Canada. I think if you're fed up with Justin Trudeau, if you've been sick of him for the last 3 or 4 years, I don't think there's any policy, any kind of coalition he could build in the House, anything he could say to sway you to not want to change or to want to change your mind.
Horse Lake Ranch in the chat says, so I haven't heard you say what you think Danielle Smith should have done. Just get up and leave. No, I don't think so. And
I think
we
she
talked
did
about this
exactly
before.
what
I think that the first part, of what she said was kind of appropriate and fitting, and I think the right response. Like, you also got to keep in mind, like,
I've talked
town
to an
hall
official.
questions, these aren't screened questions. I'm assuming they're not. Like, people are coming up to the mics. It's an open mic, and people, so you never know. Like, are you going to get a question on carbon tax? Are you going to get a question on income tax? Are you going to get a question on landowner rights? Are you going to get a question on, like, what Alberta's doing to, the Alberta's Calling campaign? Are you going to get a question on abortion? Or are you going to get a question on gender reassignment surgery? Like, you don't know, right? Mm-hmm. And so I always want to, like, cut a politician or a spokesperson a tiny little bit of slack in the first couple of seconds, because they're just like, they're doing the kind of mental math when they take the question. And I do think that right out of the gates where she goes, yeah, and she kind of, like, even her body language, she kind of goes, and she kind of shakes her head a little bit, and she goes, I've talked to the lady that controls the airspace.
Gotta know who this lady is. Who's in control of all.
We got to get the lady on the show.
Airspace.
We'll get the lady on the show. But but she goes, I've talked to the lady, and she tells me that you can't just go up there and spray chemicals, and like, that's an appropriate response.
Yeah.
But it was like when you hear this smattering of booze in the background, mm-hmm. and then she says, "But I have," she says, "But someone's told me," or "But I have heard," which is, again, I mean, I say stuff like that. People say stuff like mm-hmm. that. But like, when you're a premier, it's like, you heard it where? You heard it from whom? You heard it, like, who's the source? Yeah. People want to know. You're kind of speaking on behalf of a lot of people, and what you're saying at least has a lot of sway and a lot of influence. And then she says, but I have been told, or I have heard, that if anybody is doing it, it's the U.S. Department of Defense. Well, hang on a second. So you basically, like in the course of, it's like one sentence separated by a few boos in the middle where the comma goes, right? It's like, I've been told by the lady that this stuff doesn't happen. You can't just go up there and do this. Boo. But if it is happening, it's the Department of Defense. And that's where I think it went sideways. So Horse Lake Ranch, my answer to you is, like, I think she did all right in the first 5 seconds.
And I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like the premier is a 1-2 puncher. Like, you ask her something controversial, she calms the waters first. And then there's always a but, you know what I mean? And that's exactly what happened here. That's why she's an incredible communicator. Yeah. And the other thing is, she's a seasoned vet when this comes to this, Ryan. You're talking about, like, they don't know what question's going to be asked. She's been to these rallies. She's been to the places where the cameras aren't on. She knows some of her supporters are going to ask about vaccines and Trudeau being Castro's son and all these things. She's got her answers for that stuff lined up, right?
I had almost forgotten about the Trudeau-Castro son thing. I appreciate it. I mean, not really. Stephen in our live chat, good to see you there. Feder says, I don't think that Premier Smith genuinely believes what she said. He says, in my opinion, if she'd venture down a path of more moderate policies with a right lean, then she'd win by a landslide. Feder, I agree with you, as a matter of fact. I think that's a great comment. You can let us know what you think to talk at RyanJesperson.com. We're going to talk, speaking about conservative governance policy, we're going to talk about conservative climate policy in just a quick second with the authors of a new piece out in the Hub. But before we go there, I want to remind you that this episode happens with the support of amazing partners like the team at California Closets, that's ready to talk to you today about your design vision as you endeavor to get organized, improve the value and the feel of your space. Nobody does custom closets and storage solutions better than California Closets. Make the most of your space with their custom organizational systems. They come with a lifetime guarantee, and they can work with all different budgets, from the modest all the way up to the let's knock our socks off budgets. It all starts with that free consultation, and you can book that today at CaliforniaClosets.ca. You know those more than 6,000 public sector workers that comprise Civic Service Union 52? They've just launched their Edmonton for Everyone campaign. I want you to check it out today. If you live in or near the Metro Edmonton region, EdmontonForEveryone.ca is where you can learn more about what the CSU 52 members are doing to drive discussion on smart decision-making. They want to make sure that taxpayer dollars are being used to support core services that keep Edmonton vibrant, safe, and livable. They know that this city is growing at a rapid pace, and resources are being allocated to deliver those frontline services, but not enough. Edmonton's facing tough financial decisions, and CSU 52 wants the city focusing on what really matters. Avoid spending on projects that aren't aligning with priorities of the community. You can learn more about their advocacy at EdmontonForEveryone.ca. I got to see our pal Lynette Broadway in action last
nice.
night, opening night of CFR 50. She is the reigning champ, the defending ladies barrel racing champ. She was out there. Brett Manya was out there as well, the bullfighter. Did you catch them on Real Talk just yesterday? That was the October 2nd episode. Well, CFR 50 is now happening in the capital city of Edmonton. You can check it out online at cfr.ca where you can get tickets, and they've done an amazing job as well on that website. You can book your hotel, the whole 9 yards. This is the first time in 6 years that Edmonton's hosted CFR. I mean, it's been a long-standing tradition before that. It was great to see it in action last night. The first time CFR had ever been at Rogers Place. It was at Rexall, of course. Last time it was here, and boy, have they ever done a good job. Welcome home, rodeo fans. CFR 50 continuing on over the next few days through till October 6th. Again, that's cfr.ca to get your tickets. And our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy have that "We're Hiring" sign out for their locations in Kamloops, Lethbridge, Calgary, and Edmonton. If you're an electrician, an installer, an apprentice, salesperson, office manager, you name it, their team is always growing. They're Western Canada's busiest solar installer. Look at those installs Johnny's showing us for our YouTube audience. The cleanest stuff you ever did see. You can check out the careers link if you're ready to take that next step in your career journey. You'll find it online at kubienergy.ca.
Yeah, got something to fall back on right there.
Don't talk like that, John. That's not funny.
The friends at Kubi will always...
Not funny.
Just kidding.
No, I'm going to let them know. I'm going to say you may be getting an application from Johnny. Put that into the G file. That's the garbage bit. Put that into the G file. Hey, it kind of makes sense, I guess, that we're talking about solar. We're talking about green energy because that's what our next couple of guests are focusing on, the work that they're doing right now at Clean Prosperity, the continuance of what they've been doing in their careers, advocating for energy policy, or in some cases acting against energy policy that they just don't think is a good fit for Albertans, Ontarians, and Canadians, generally speaking. They've just written a piece together, co-authored at thehub.ca. It's time for conservatives to lead on climate policy, and here's why. It's a pleasure to welcome to the show Benjamin Dachis, Adam Sweet. Ben, born and raised in Calgary, he's joining us out of Toronto. He was at the C.D. Howe Institute for about 15 years, and he was Ontario Premier, Doug Ford's first Director of Policy, Budget, and Fiscal Planning, currently VP of Research and Outreach at Clean Prosperity. You've heard Adam Sweet on the show before, good friend of the show, born and raised Alberta boy, longtime conservative. He was, as a matter of fact, the founding VP of Policy and Bylaw for the United Conservative Party under Jason Kenney. He's been a spokesperson for Canada's Environment Minister through the Harper years, and he's the Director for Western Canada for Clean Prosperity. Good to see you both. Thanks for making time for us. Adam, people are going to say right now, okay, good, finally a fulsome conversation about conservatives and climate policy, because the perception is we have not had one up until now, at least not in recent memory. Fair?
I think it's fair. There's been a lot of conversation about how are we going to just define ourselves in opposition to others. You and Johnny were talking earlier about the U.S. election, and we can't just be having a situation in which leaders are trying to define their strategy in opposition to current ideas. It actually has to be about a vision. It has to be about something more. And that was part of the conversation that Ben and I wanted to start with this piece of saying, as conservatives, we actually have a really strong track record nationally and provincially, and it's an opportunity for us to switch from kind of more of a defensive approach to one where we say, no, actually, this is something that Canada can lead the world in low carbon economic growth. We can have a diversified energy strategy that advances our economic and energy security interests while also reducing emissions. And so this is part of a larger series that we're holding on the Hub, trying to get a bigger conversation around, with conservatives around climate policy.
Benjamin, you've not been afraid to act on climate policy that you've not seen, or at least that your employer, the Premier of Ontario at that time, did not see as beneficial for that province, for Canadians. And as a matter of fact, both of you write about it in your piece. One of you, Adam, helped take Canada out of the Kyoto Protocol. Benjamin, you worked on canceling renewable electricity contracts and energy conservation programs in Ontario. So people that have seen your name and have seen the history there might say, well, this guy just doesn't want any policy at all. This guy is an enemy of renewables. This guy is an enemy of clean energy. Are you?
Absolutely not. If you look at the Green Energy Act, the previous Liberal government put in place, the contracts that they put in place put in place outrageously high costs on consumers, and canceling those was the right thing for consumers. But now technology has improved. And when facts on the ground change, policy should change as well. Costs for wind and solar are coming down quite a bit in Ontario. And guess what the Ontario government can and is doing? They're looking to get more low-cost renewable electricity. So that kind of policy of getting rid of bad contracts, but changing tack and bringing in the lowest possible cost electricity when it's renewables makes sense for Ontarians. It probably going to make sense in Alberta too.
Adam, go ahead. I was going to ask
you.
Ryan,
can I just jump in on that, Ryan, real quick with the Kyoto Protocol piece? So one of the things I wanted to highlight with that was one of the reasons I'm proud to talk about pulling out of Kyoto is that when we did that, it was a situation in which Canada had two options. The day that we pulled out, there were two options. One, we either start to pay out billions and billions of dollars of fines because nothing had been done, or we announced that we were pulling out and try to find a better solution. And the previous governments, years before, had acknowledged that they committed to Kyoto without any plan. And so that is part of the argument that we're trying to make here, is that it's really important that we set those clear visions, that we move forward in climate policy, but we do it by not just trying to oppose what exists, but instead say, where does Canada want to get to? What do we see ourselves being in 2050 as a net zero country, as a net zero province, and really owning that as Conservatives? That's just a piece I wanted to just clarify in Kyoto.
Well, and I want to, because I think a part of this too, Adam, and correct me if I'm assuming wrong here, but I get the sense that you're not convinced that international agreements are the way to go. I mean, am I making too broad of a statement there, or is that your conviction?
My conviction would be that international agreements are helpful to create that collaboration, but really at its core, the way you succeed in any form of policy is by ensuring that the people who are most affected by the policy, who are part of forming it. So we need to see a situation in which the provinces are equal partners with the federal government in how they're creating climate policy and climate vision for the country. We need to ensure that industry is part of that conversation as well, and that we figure out what is going to work best in Canada towards those objectives, and then bring that to the international conversation. Don't start with okay, we're going to go and have and set a target that works, based off of what everybody else likes to do, and then figure out how we're going to implement it internally. Instead, start at home, figure that plan out, build it on first principles of free enterprise and something and the way to support Canadian economic growth. We see this is possible. It is possible for us to be a supplier of oil and gas to the world for generations to come, and also be, the place that, as we see in Innisfail, is mining CO2 out of the air, just like we're mining carbon out of the earth, and being able to put it and store it underground. So there is a way to do both, but it has to start here at home, and it has to start with Conservatives saying, where do we want to go? What is the vision? And then bring Canadians into that conversation.
We're always I'm obviously one of the sort of the premise of the show, or at least one of the big pillars is sort of the question, and then what, or so what, or what does this mean? And there's no denying that Pierre Poilievre's Axe the Tax slogan has caught on big time. I mean, there's rallies. You drive the QE2 between Calgary and Edmonton. Benjamin, I don't know the last time you've been on that highway, but it seems like almost every rest stop, there's this ongoing trailer party. People are just hanging out there having these Axe the Tax. I mean, they look like they're having a hell of a time. They're having a great time. They've been there for weeks and weeks. I don't know what the hell they're doing with their lives, but they're having a great time. It's working from a slogan standpoint, but on shows like this, and I think Canadians across the country are going, Axe the Tax, and then what? And then what's the plan? And you have to assume at some point there's going to be a plan put in front of Canadians. But there's a sentence in your piece here, Benjamin, that really jumped off the page to me. Canadian Conservatives should stop letting their views on climate be defined in opposition to progressive views. And I think that hits the nail on the head. So what does that look like going forward? We got to stop. Conservatives got to stop letting the views on climate be defined in opposition to progressive views. Where do their views need to be defined? How do they define those views? What's the most effective way for Pierre Poilievre Conservative premiers to do it?
Yeah, the way I think of it, and this is a starting point for what's going to be, I'm sure, a year-long or more conversation until we get to a conservative climate policy, is pragmatism. And when we're thinking about a practical emissions reduction plan that reflects affordability concerns. A couple of examples off the top of my head of where we don't want to have a rapid all or nothing push towards full electrification of transportation and home heating, if that's just going to be impractical in places like in Western Canada, where it gets really cold in the winter. Surprise, surprise. And heat pump, full electrification of a home is going to be really hard. We should recognize that. But there are lots of approaches out there in terms of technologies such as hybrid heating that uses natural gas when we have really cold days, but it introduces heat pumps for non-emitting, at least at the home, heating for a lot of the other times. That's a practical solution that can reduce emissions and be fairly cost effective. Practical measures like that could be a part of a future climate policy.
Adam, how much or to what degree do you think the outcome of the U.S. presidential race, the election on November 5th, how is that going to factor into the conversation we're having here in Canada?
I think it's going to factor in pretty dramatically. I think it's going to create senses, one way or the other, that we have to pivot, either pivot towards whatever direction that a Harris administration is looking to, or pivot towards whatever direction a Trump administration is looking to. The part that I think is really interesting, though, is when we, when we take a look at what has actually happened under U.S. policy. Obama advanced some of the greatest reductions in terms of vehicle emissions, which Harper government then copied. But he also had the single largest growth in oil production in the history of all presidents in the United States, right? So we have a situation in which the U.S. is able to both advance its economic interests as well as work towards, like we see in the Inflation Reduction Act, work towards emissions reductions. I think my concern is that we take a signal as a country too far based off of what happens in the States, as opposed to defining our own kind of policy and plans. And I think, one thing I did want to say, you were talking about the QE2 people, and I do think that's where you'll find your airspace person. You go and go.
Do you know who this lady is, by the way?
Oh yeah. We text regularly. Actually,
yeah. Put us in touch. Put us in touch, please.
It's all part of the same ecosystem.
Yeah.
But I think one of the parts that's interesting, in terms of the reaction we've had to our piece, Ryan, we've had, this is one of the reasons why I love your show is, you talk often about how people on the far right and people on the far left are attacking the things that you're saying. And at that point in time, you're probably saying the right thing. We're having a very similar reaction to our piece, where we're having, the Twitter engagement that I'm having has been very similar to when I was a press secretary in the Harper government, in terms of the engagement on either side. So I do think that there's a desire for this. There is a path forward for us as a country, and if a conservative government is forming that, really to lean into a vision of low carbon economic growth. And I think that's something that people are wanting, and it's something that conservatives can provide.
I want to. I'll put the question to both of you. Adam, you may take it. I don't know, but I'd be curious on your thoughts, Benjamin, as well. So we were chatting last night. I had a chance to connect with a guy. I'm pretty sure he doesn't want his name dragged into this conversation, because he's working on what they're trying to do. The family between Alberta and Saskatchewan farms about 200,000 acres. Wow. They're very serious players, and they do a ton of different farming, and they're looking at getting into developing, and they're working right now on trying to build a solar farm. They want to generate over about 2,000 acres, and he was conveying his frustration to me on what it's been like dealing with government and red tape and roadblocks and the whole nine yards. He's a real property rights guy. He's a free enterprise guy. He's an entrepreneur, third generation at what he's doing. And it kind of stuck with me, his comments last night that, the government seems to be sticking its nose into what I can do with my land. The government seems to know about my land better than I do, or at least that's the way they feel. He believes that he can still farm that land with the solar farm. He's got a plan to have, livestock underneath the panels, and really, really fascinating stuff. But we got into the impact of that months-long wind and solar, the renewables moratorium that Danielle Smith and Minister Rebecca Schultz had implemented a while ago. Everybody knows about that. If you listen to this show, you know about that. He was particularly concerned about the impact that it was having on industry, on ingenuity, on entrepreneurship. I mean, he was able to articulate it very well. I told him that we'd talk about it on the show. I didn't know it would be 10 hours later, but here we are. You make the argument, the two of you in your piece, that Alberta is actually, getting kind of the short end of the stick, that Alberta's getting a raw deal, being portrayed as kind of an outlier with a lack of climate policy. You're suggesting that Alberta deserves a whole lot more credit. And quite frankly, I'm not convinced, but I'd like to hear you make the argument.
Sure. So I'm going to parse a couple different pieces that you had there. So specifically on the renewables moratorium, any form of energy development, whether that is at a federal level or provincial level, I think is great, and I think we should be supporting that. I think whether that is traditional forms of energy or low carbon growth that we need to have moving forward that actually reduces our emissions and provides us the energy security, frankly, that Canada needs moving into an increasingly unstable world. So I do think that creating certainty for investors, whether that is through carbon contracts for difference on a emissions reductions or on a carbon credit market side, or whether that is through not implementing moratoriums that create uncertainty in the market, I think that certainty piece has to be at the fore. That is part of a conservative approach using free enterprise and saying we welcome that investment into our province. So to address that piece, I want to put that in there. I do think that when we think about things like TIER and the fact that Alberta has been the first place to introduce a carbon price. I'd also point out that federal Conservatives were some of the first to introduce carbon prices. We did it through a regulatory approach in terms of sector by sector, but there was still a price on carbon. We've seen Conservatives lead on that. We've seen Conservatives. When I look to Alberta, I can't see any other province that is investing over $12 billion between the Alberta Petroleum Producers Incentive Program or the Carbon Capture Incentive Program. In terms of actually putting money where mouth is to advance that. Alberta has set a target of net zero emissions, net zero by 2050. Very clear on that. We would like to see more clarity on what those targets could look like, so that there's again that certainty for investors. But I do think that there is a case. In terms of the renewable growth that happened here, again, I've already mentioned. I think that we could see more, and I think that's positive. But the renewable growth. The fact that you have a super cluster of no carbon and low carbon energy development taking place just north of us here, northeast of us here in Fort Saskatchewan, where we see direct air capture south of us in Innisfail that's coming online, where we see carbon capture and storage northwest of us in Grand Prairie with Entropy, where we see the work in terms of wind and energy and solar production, the place where I'm actually going hunting later today in terms of southeastern Alberta. I think that Alberta has done tremendous work. Do we need to do more? 100% we need to do more. Do we need to have a clear vision as a province and as a federal government of where we want to go? 100%. But I do think that Alberta is considered continuously this pariah, and it's an argument of, well, if you're not doing enough, then we're gonna wipe the whole thing off. I don't think that's fair. I do think we need to do more, and I think that it's incumbent upon us as an energy producer to do more. And it's incumbent upon our industry to do more as well, and to stop waiting for the largest, handouts they can get from government. I do think that it's time for us to advance that forward. But I think that at its core, Alberta has done some tremendous work and should be recognized for that.
Yeah, I would add that the instincts of Alberta Conservatives, the lean in the free markets, is really going to help them in this space. I can give you a couple of examples. First of all is the electricity market. Alberta has probably one of the freest electricity markets in terms of free entry in the world. And so when we allow free entry, guess what's going to come in now at the most competitive cost? It's going to be a lot of renewables. That's just one example where we should let the market operate. A second one is Alberta's tier system, on industrial pricing. That kind of approach is going to be the lowest cost way for us to reduce emissions. Again, both pretty open market and transparent markets. Let's lean into that approach.
Yeah, you think the fluctuations, the massive fluctuations in at-home costs for people, like bottom line costs for utilities. You think that I think that probably gets people. I think the twitch factor, probably is ramped up this year more than previous years on the benefits or the detriments of the free market or of Alberta's structure. Ben, would you agree? Like it's been a bit of a people have been in a bit of a wind wobble this year. People that haven't been used to that in past that have been seeing benefits of Alberta's structure when the realization I think in this past year was that can swing both ways.
For sure. And so this goes to a conversation we've had here in Ontario, which is when the market is stressed. And in January, the market was really stressed. You've got two approaches. One is you lean into the market design and figure out ways to improve the market where companies come in with solutions. Now, we're still talking about a market here. Or you go the opposite direction and have guys in white lab coats try to determine where the market's going to go, and we have to trust trust the eggheads to do that. I'm worried about that approach when we're leaning into centralized power in a handful of bureaucrats or market insiders. Bad things happen quickly. I'd rather lean into a market approach to solve some of these solutions, to solve some of these issues.
Would you guys acknowledge that when it comes to, hey, if you think that this assessment is unfair, just say it. But my conviction, my observation is that I think that a lot of climate policy conversation in conservative circles is halted because of the unpopularity of the premise. And the premise that's been sold to us by politicians is that, they are trying to kill oil and gas. They're trying to kill your jobs. They're trying to, why don't you go heat your homes in the middle of December with solar panel? We've heard all that, right? And I think that, you get like, I'm trying to think like top of my head, federal example might be someone like Michael Chong that in past, many years ago, he hasn't been so prominent as in recent years, but a guy like that would come forward and say, hey, here's some really good and bold ideas, kind of, echoing or at least maybe trailblazing some of the thoughts that you guys are talking about here. And quite frankly, it landed with a bit of a thud. It was almost like there wasn't an appetite. There wasn't an audience for it. Now, you make a compelling argument about profitability and economic opportunity and ingenuity and innovation and all these types of things. But at the end of the day, if a politician feels like it's not going to play well, forget about their responsibilities to integrate good policy. They're not going to do it. Agree?
Yeah, you know what, Ryan? You basically you really hit the nail on the head of what life for me has been like for the last couple of years, where I have many folks, including people who've been on your show, tell me how I am a raging lefty and how I just want oil and gas to be shut down, and don't I care about the kids and all these different things. That is a challenge, right? This is part of the reason what we're trying to argue is to say, like, hold the phone. Let's actually look at the facts that conservatives have and continue to lead and can continue to lead on climate if we just get out of our way. One of the things, when we were taught as campaign managers or as staffers is, the sword versus shield issue. Like, just don't talk about climate policy. Don't talk about the environment. We're not going to win on it. Just leave it alone. The base is going to get angry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my response to that is actually a lot of my friends are the folks who would be in that quote unquote base. And they are some of the strongest environmentalist conservationists that I know. They're the folks who are arguing that we need to address climate change because it's affecting, I mentioned hunting. It's affecting the migratory patterns of the birds that they hunt. It's affecting, we're seeing it's affecting the herds that the fish that they're fishing. It is there's an argument. There's an interesting piece actually in the Hub by former Reform MP Conservative Minister Monty Solberg, who I had the good fortune of working for, who talks about the fact there is nothing unconservative about conservation, about protecting our natural heritage, and a piece of that really comes into climate policy. And so we're really trying to argue to say that you need to reframe this conversation and not just let others continue to define us as being anti-climate or anti-oil and gas. The fact of the matter is that, and Alberta is showing that you can do both. Do we need to do more? 100%, right? Like I am not going to be an apologist for Alberta not moving things forward. That we need to address those things 100%. We have research along those lines that we put out regularly, I should say. But I'm not going to. But when I'm in these conversations with folks who are saying, Adam, you just don't care about oil and gas, or Adam, you just don't care about the environment, I figure if both sides are telling me that I don't care about their issue, but regular people, regular farmers on the ground who I talk to, regular folks, at the soccer teams that I'm coaching are saying, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like we're on the right direction.
Yeah, it's like the farmer wants to make sure that the increased weather-related challenges, hailstorms, drought, whatever they may be, are not going to destroy their crops, destroy their livelihood. At the same time, they want to make sure that they're going to be able to continue to afford to farm. And if you can find that sweet spot in the middle, I think that that's a pretty common sense position. Before we go, Ben, I want to ask you. So you were, as mentioned, Premier Ford's Director of Policy, Budget, and Fiscal Planning in Ontario. If you had the same job or a similar job with the federal Conservatives, if you were advising Pierre Poilievre right now, what's one thing you'd like to see Mr. Poilievre put in front of Canadians in the context of climate policy? Not just the slogan, not just axe the tax, but something that might inspire people moving forward.
I'd say is that we're going to use the tools that reduce emissions at the lowest cost. And that's, for example, things like industrial pricing. The system that we have in Alberta in particular, leaning on the tier system, is a very effective way of reducing our emissions at relatively low cost to the economy. It creates incentives, creates business opportunities for companies to invest in world-leading technologies, to be out there and get support to invest in decarbonized investment that's going to put them in very good shape for investment and export around the world. So that's the number one message I'd get across in terms of a positive vision.
Benjamin Dachis joining us from Ontario. Adam Sweet joining us from Alberta. What are you hunting for, by the way? What are you hunting?
Prairie chicken, ducks, and some geese.
All right, good luck, buddy.
I can bring you some. I'm not sure if you finished that book from last time, but
How to Win an Election? Yeah.
What's that?
The How to Win an Election book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I let people know behind the scenes. Every time Adam visits in studio, he drops off a book, and I've really appreciated that. You're probably the reason why, I read my first book in 10 years because of you, Adam, so I appreciate that. I shouldn't admit that, but it's real talk. You can read Ben and Adam's piece at thehub.ca, and you can learn more about what they're doing, their day jobs, by visiting cleanprosperity.ca. Thanks both for joining us. We appreciate you kickstarting this conversation again.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks, guys. You can let us know what you think about what you just heard. Talk at ryanjesperson.com. Appreciate the comments in the live chat as well. How about this from Ken, who says, corporate gifts are not fiscal conservatism. I am a fiscal conservative, says Ken. This government is not fiscally conservative. Denis, by the way, says, have oil and gas clean up their mess with their profits instead of government doing so with taxpayer funds. Oh, man, we start that conversation on Orphan Wells again. That one, every single time we talk about that, I just kind of get a pit in my stomach. That just infuriates me. You can let us know what you think about this, and if this prompts maybe some discussion in your household, your workplace, among your circle of friends, we'd love to hear about it. We're going to get to a couple of your comments. We've got an email here from Laura that I want to get to based on an interview that we did with Jason Schilling. He's the president of the Alberta Teachers Association. That's coming up in just a quick second. But speaking of educators and speaking of education, the University of Alberta Alumni is getting set to hand out its annual Alumni Awards, coming up at the Meyer Horowitz Theatre on Thursday, October 24th. And we want to make sure that you're ready to celebrate along with these esteemed alumni. You can check out the deal online. I'm showing it to you on my screen right now at uab.ca/alumni awards. And they've got a whole bunch of folks, the 2024 recipients, listed on that website, so you can see who's going to be honored. Linda Ogilvie pioneered nursing education programs in Ghana, doing amazing work shaping global health. Stephen Wood, and I'm not mentioning everybody because there's a ton of them, but Stephen preserved Cree traditions through music and education, keeping cultural heritage alive. Carla Duncan, a sports legend who led the Pandas field hockey team to victory as a player and a coach. Frincy Clement, an AI pioneer, helping define global guidelines for responsible AI development, and so many more. From athletic champions to AI innovators, U of A alumni are making a difference and leaving their mark on the world. Get inspired yourself. Learn more about these trailblazers and how they're making a difference. Again, that website, uab.ca/alumni awards. That's coming up on the 24th of October. Have you got your Thanksgiving plans figured out yet? Friesen Brothers has you covered with their Thanksgiving dinner box. We've tapped into this amazing resource many different times, many different years as a family. Why? Because you're not going to get food that's better than this. I mean, these are like Granny's recipes. I mean, this is like the classic stuff. You got that beautiful roasted turkey. You've got the house-made cranberry sauce, not that crap out of a jar. You got the gravy, the tray buns, roasted baby potatoes, root veggies. You can add on handcrafted fruit pies. Just ask Johnny about the pies. They've got Granny's famous stuffing and iconic fresh and gooey cinnamon buns. You can also order this online, by the way, through the Friesen Brothers Order Ahead app. You can learn more online at cateringbyfriesen.com/Thanksgiving box. Are you like a pumpkin pie guy, or would you go apple pie at Thanksgiving?
Oh yeah,
what
pumpkin pie in the fall, of course.
Isn't pumpkin pie the best?
Isn't
it just the best,
is
John?
The best.
It is the best. Hey, I was mentioning our friends at Complete Care Restoration, and I just wanted to touch on something real quick. As we were so proud to announce on the show, on My Jasper Memories, presented by Tourism Jasper, the town of Jasper is ready to welcome visitors back. It is now time. You can check out jasper.travel/wildfire for more information on what they're asking. Responsible tourism. There's a few things to keep in mind. You're going to notice a lot of crews are out there right now, obviously working. Some of them are doing demolition. Some of them are starting to build again. A lot of them are, trying to address things like smoke damage. I mean, you don't really realize the effect of these wildfires. A lot of the structures that are still standing have sustained major smoke damage. And the team at Complete Care Restoration is out there. They've actually got a number of teams deployed. I was just talking to their senior leadership just the other day. They were out there like as soon as they could. I think it was like 36 hours after the fire, Johnny, and they're restoring properties, they're rebuilding peace of mind, and they're going to be there till the job is done, treating these properties, the businesses, the homes, like it's their own. If disaster strikes in your community, if you've got a mold problem, maybe it's asbestos you're dealing with, don't forget Complete Care Restoration. They've been doing it for more than a quarter century. We recommend them. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. All right, sometimes we get these emails from folks and we just appreciate the passion, but sometimes they're like a couple pages, and I kind of go through, like I get to play teacher, I take my red pen and hack and slash and edit these emails down. But every once in a while you get one that from start to finish just needs to be read, and that's this one from Laura here. She was inspired to write in after she heard Jason Schilling on the show, the president of the Alberta Teachers Association. He was talking about Alberta education in crisis. And I want to get to Laura's firsthand perspective, but first, why don't we tee this up? This again from our September 26th episode, just about a week ago on Real Talk. Here's Jason Schilling.
We're dead last in spending, so they need to address that. I mean, if we were in the budget that we saw last year, there was a 4.4% increase to public education, 13.5% increase to private education. We needed to see 13.5% in budget 2024 just to bring us to the Canadian average. That equates to $1.2 billion. That's what we're short in the system to just be the average among Canadian provinces. This is a choice that they're making to unfund education in this way. This is a choice that they've done. They've chosen to underfund our schools in a systematic way that increases our class sizes, reduces resources for our students, and quite honestly is causing my colleagues to burn out and leave the profession. So yeah, we're going to build a whole bunch of new schools in 3 years. I don't know who's going to be around to work in those schools.
So that's Jason Schilling, president of Alberta Teachers on Real Talk. So Laura writes in to talk at ryanjesperson.com. She says, I apologize for the lengthy email, Jespo, but your podcast hit a hot button for me, and once I started writing, I couldn't stop, so buckle up. So I'll pass that along to the audience. She says, I was listening to your September 26th show with Jason Schilling and the follow-up you did the next day because I wanted to hear the audience response. She says, as an elementary teacher in the public system for the last 10 years, I find I'm often in agreement with our ATA president. I'm grateful for the advocacy that he does, especially when it comes to classroom sizes and conditions. And I know that much of the focus nowadays is on class size for really good reason, as well as more resources to support those kids. But the part of the podcast that had me stop, rewind, and replay over and over was the comment from Shalane in your live chat, the educational assistant who wrote in, and Jason Schilling's response to her. Shalane said, with inclusive ed, EAs are no longer able to help the kids with extra literacy or numeracy, and these kids are falling through the cracks. Laura says this sentence resonates in a huge way with me and with the vast majority of teachers that I've ever worked with. And the comment deserved so much unpacking, and I was appalled by Jason's immediate jump to EA pay. Please do not mistake this to mean that we shouldn't address their pay. It does need to be addressed because what they're making is criminal, but that's not what her comment was referring to. What she was saying is that inclusive education means that all children born within a certain time frame have the right to be in a general education classroom for that grade level, and this includes students with special needs. Whether it be mobility, vision, impairments, significant developmental delays, extremely violent behaviors, mental health disorders, medical needs, ADHD, ODD, autism, whatever. These needs can range from mild to severe, but no matter what, it's considered to be the job of the teacher to adjust when a child with significant needs is in a class. And when I've spoken about this over the years to my friends and family members who are not teachers, they've all been shocked to hear that there are students with severe needs in my room, because so many people still respond with, well, isn't there a special class for that? And yeah, sometimes there are. But between funding cuts for these specialized classes, a lack of space, and parental choice, many children with needs are placed into a room with 25 other little ones, and the teacher is expected to become an expert overnight to support these kids with needs that experts spend years studying on how to effectively address them. The line that families are fed is that we can support their needs, but the simple truth is that we often cannot in a general ed setting. And while we're doing everything in our power to do some good, many kids are being left behind. And let me be clear, says Laura, additional EA support is not enough. Now, what the general public doesn't understand is that it's not just one kid with challenges in a room full of neurotypical, well-behaved children who rally around that child and help them thrive, despite the propaganda they showed in my one inclusion class that I took in university. The issue is that there are oftentimes multiple kids in the room with significant needs, many of whom are not working at the grade level, many of whom are not working on graded curriculum at all. And the vast spread of needs in one room is impossible to reach. Many kids also require medical attention, all of which is tended to by educational assistants, by EAs. That can include toileting assistance, diaper changes, assistance with feeding, support with a G-tube, dispensing medication. They also provide mental health support, supervised breaks to support a child's sensory needs, or sitting with a child who's experiencing severe emotional dysregulation to keep them and others safe. There are typically at least a few kids in each class that experience these challenges, and in some classes it's a much higher number. A few years ago, I had a class of grade 3 students. She said, here's the rundown. Check this out. 28 students impacted by COVID, 7 IPPs and 3 students waiting for psych tests, 1 student learning Braille, 1 student with cochlear implants, who is also learning English, 1 student with a communication disorder, 2 students with cognitive delays who could not do regular classwork, 3 students with significant behavioral issues. She says I'm talking about violent outbursts, temper tantrums, refusal to work, extremely disruptive, 1 medical management plan for ADHD meds, 12 English language learners, 10 emergent readers, 8 subjects to teach, 1 EA, and 1 teacher. And what all this means, the end result, is that kids who simply need help with literacy and numeracy are rarely getting support. The roles of an EA and a teacher so often consist of all these other duties to maintain a baseline of safety and well-being that they can't get to the educational needs of all the students. Laura says, when I was, basically teaching during COVID restrictions, I had a student in one of my classes with a severe developmental delay that caused her to function at the level of an 18-month-old. Her mother wanted her in our class to make friends, and I would spend my recesses trying to coax her to eat her food, and she would sit in the corner of the classroom on an exercise ball, right? She had her own little corner in my overcrowded classroom because what she needed was to play and move around like any 18-month-old. But we're talking about a grade 4 and 5 class. This all was occurring while I was at the front trying to teach long division to the rest of the class. Of course it's natural for someone at her stage of development to throw a tantrum, and at times she would do so during lessons. I had 5 other students who had diagnosed learning disorders that year. But because of this first child's needs required one-on-one attention with an EA, the others were receiving 0 additional support for their academics, and it broke my heart to watch her playing alone in the corner. And as much as I loved her, I knew that a general education classroom was not the right fit for her, nor was I qualified to program for her needs. But the parents were not yet in an emotional place to hear my professional opinion. And thankfully, after an immense amount of advocacy and extra legwork, I know that she thrived the following year in a specialized program designed for her needs. So, are children being placed in classrooms where we know their needs will not be met? It is so frustrating that professional judgment and lack of teacher capacity is trumped and that all the students remain unsupported with their needs. She says, I am not trying to vilify parents or students with high needs at all, but this is the reality of today's Alberta education system. She says, additionally, there's parents who want their kids in special programs, but there's often no space available or not enough funding to even create those in the first place. The reality of our school system is that it's changed completely since the introduction of inclusion policies. In theory, it sounds like this is best for all. However, my 10 years of experience have demonstrated this is not always the case, and this is not something that will be touched by politicians with a 10-foot pole. The second that anybody speaks this way, advocacy groups become deeply upset, argue that we don't care about the rights of children with needs. There cannot be further from the truth. There's nothing more heartbreaking or defeating for educators who want nothing but the best for their students than to know that kids are being failed in their own classroom because we can't possibly get to them all. Smaller class sizes are part of the solution, but they don't address everything. And while I was not at all surprised to hear some of the ignorant vitriol that is consistently spewed at teachers about always wanting more, that was on last week's Flamethrower, specifically more money and throwing our, quote, vacation days at us, it feels like our professional body and our union are also failing teachers. They're failing students and they're failing parents by refusing to address the truth. Our inclusion model as it stands is not sustainable. I've grown up around educators. I'm the child of an educator. I was a public school student myself. I believe strongly in public education and what educators can do for our students. But the reality is that one teacher simply does not have the capacity to be what everybody needs all at once. It's a system created to fail, and our current government is doing everything in its power to break it down further. We need to listen to our teachers and our EAs, acknowledge what isn't working, and make changes to ensure that all students, teachers, and families are getting support that's realistic and sustainable for everybody to thrive. She says, if you're still reading this, we sure as hell are, Laura. Thank you for your time. She says, this issue hits home for many of us. Really appreciate that. And I guarantee that your email is going to inspire more feedback to the show. If you're a parent, if you're an educator, if you're a student that came up like this and experienced it, maybe one of our younger audience members, we'd love to hear your perspective and understand a little bit more about how what we're talking about here lands with you. Nobody gets more passionate than teachers and healthcare workers. I love it.
Of course.
The emails we get from them help us better understand the issues because these are people checking in from the front lines. You know what I mean?
So complicated, this issue, too. Like, what do you do? Like, you separate all the kids into levels, like the bright ones and then the ones with problems. And I feel bad for kids these days because I feel like they just have more problems. They're just dealing with more stuff. They've got more stress. Their whole life is online. It's a really complicated situation, but very well articulated.
Really was. And I'm thrilled to see that Shalane happens to be in the live chat again today. And so, Shalane, shout out to you for inspiring that note from Laura. Shalane says, thank you so much, Laura. You said what I couldn't in my 175 characters comment. Are comments limited to 175 characters in our live chat? I guess
there is, there's a character.
Interesting. She says, Shalane says, that's exactly what I meant. And what I'm going through in all the classes that I sub in, Shalane says, I'm in tears right now. Well, Shalane, a shout out to you and to everybody that works to help teach our kids. I understand, I would understand where parents are coming from. I understand the value and the necessity of having diversity in classrooms and having, kids from all different backgrounds and all different scenarios. I think that that's part of the beauty, and I think that's one of the great teaching tools in public education.
Sure.
Is that the classroom reflects society in all the different demographics and all of the different challenges. But at the same time, Laura giving us a real great perspective check on some of the challenges that come along with that. And Ken, don't think we didn't see your $5 contribution to the YouTube super chat. We sure appreciate that, Ken, very much. That's a beer for Johnny on this early Friday. Do want to mention that we are going to be Real Talk will be off tomorrow because I'm proud to be hosting the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce CFR breakfast and brunch event downtown. Are you going to come get some flapjacks, pal?
You say the word brunch.
Yeah,
I'm already there.
I don't know why I called
in line right now. I got my plate in my hand.
You want to know what my crew call is tomorrow? I don't know why I called it brunch. I got to be there at 7 in the freaking morning. And I'm hosting an event in Calgary tonight at Hotel Arts, and so we'll see how that's going to work.
So you're going down, then back up?
Yeah, that's right. But it's going to be a lot of fun. But that does mean that this will be our last episode this week of Real Talk. We're going to be back at it again on Monday. And I want to let you know that coming up on Tuesday, we're not wrapping yet, but coming up on Tuesday, I just want to give you a heads up. This inclusion in ed thing, Laura's email, like there's a reason why I'm reading this to you today, because on Tuesday's Real Talk, we're dedicating an entire episode to it. So if you have kids in school right now, if you have kids that are preschool age, about to enter the education system, if you're an educator yourself, you're not going to want to miss that. That's coming up on Tuesday's Real Talk. As we wrap every week, our friends at the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park set the table for us to fire up our hottest takes. We put the invitation out to you. We want to know what's looking at, that bee under your bonnet, that burr under your saddle, so to speak. These are all real emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com. It's the Flamethrower, presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. This one from Harry, who says, Jespo, I don't know what Danielle Smith and her MLAs truly believe, but their preoccupation with and willingness to pander to conspiracy theories has real costs for the people of Alberta. Events like this whole injection of truth thing, that vaccine thing, and the UCB's willingness to put forward false claims about vaccines, to say nothing of the government's failure to promote the efficacy and safety of vaccines, is going to lead to far fewer Albertans being immunized at all ages. It's going to lead to an increase in vaccine-preventable illness and subsequent serious health outcomes. The decision to ban electronic voting machines, largely because of unfounded fears of election fraud perpetuated by conspiracy theorists in the U.S., will cost the people of Alberta millions of dollars more to run elections and lead to significant delays in learning election results. And the unwillingness to recognize the severe threat that anthropogenic climate change poses, while coming up with theories that worsening wildfires are the result of arsonists, appearing with and supporting prominent climate change deniers like Tucker Carlson and Jordan Peterson, leads to decisions like that unjustified moratorium on solar and wind energy, which is estimated to have cost the province billions in lost investment. Governing a province is serious business, says Harry, and requires the government to be grounded in science and reality, not listening to, making policy decisions on, and investigating every single conspiracy theory brought to them by a party member. Until then, we, the people of Alberta, will all pay the price, as Danielle Smith and the UCP seem fixated on those conspiracy theories. And then Harry signs off. Have a great week. Thanks, Harry. Appreciate that. What about this from Russ? This is that email from Russ, the subject line, chemtrails, OMG. I can't believe that's my subject line. Russ says, I listened to you and Johnny give Danielle Smith some credit for attempting to provide respect in a response to a town hall participant about that chemtrails question. Russ says, listen, I'm all for civil political discourse, and I do think that's something that's sorely lacking, especially when a lot of the conversation is done from this safety of one's couch or crapper. Thanks for the visual, Russ. He says, but I couldn't help but notice at the same time this BS from Danielle Smith was hitting the proverbial fan. One of the news channels posted an article about the rise of what they called salad bar extremism, the rise in conspiracies, the growing trend of people that are picking and choosing alternative realities, probably helped by algorithms, is leading to an increased risk of extremism. And we've already seen it in a lot of ways. Does a premier or other person in a position of leadership not have a fiduciary obligation to better attempt to diffuse garbage like this, as opposed to having it continue to poison discourse and ignore science and evidence, or even common sense? Russ says, I'll go one step further. I don't even think she was trying to be polite. What was the audience for this crowd? Was it a public town hall? Like, this feels a whole lot more like an attempt to humor her base or coddle some leadership review votes than any attempt at civility. Like, who are the unnamed people that she was talking to? The vagueness only leads to more conspiratorial thinking. And in doing so, he says the BS from DS, Danielle Smith, he's thinking of selling some shirts, he says. While the BS from DS embarrasses Albertans, it puts us at risk of extremism by continuing to fan the flames for selfish political gain. Now, I recognize, says Russ, that politicians play games like this all the time. But if there is risk of true social or physical harm, they should be held accountable. And this excessive BS from DS is leading to some serious fecal compaction in Alberta's discourse. That's from Russ. This one from Michael, who says, I'm watching on the news about that HWN Energy pump jack fire near Airdrie. Did you see that, by the way? A pump jack exploded?
Crazy. Yeah.
It was a wild fire. Michael says, and now the company says they're committed to cooperating with the Alberta Energy Regulator. Michael said, oh, they'll cooperate? You mean when the AER barely investigates and doles out absolutely no consequence for environmental damage and lack of safety? Yeah, I guess I would cooperate with that too. The Alberta Energy Regulator is a joke and an embarrassment, just like our premier. That from Michael. You can fire up your flamethrower anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. It is proudly presented by the DQs in Palisades, Namao, Newcastle, Westmount, Baseline Road. When you're in there picking up a Blizzard or a signature stack burger, you let them know that Real Talk sent you. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks, everybody, for making this part of your routine. Make sure you tell your friends. Thanks for subscribing on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll talk to you on Monday.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.